world stand today with a lot of people speculating that the American empire is in decay and it's the Chinese who are taking over?
Well, I would probably agree with the first part of this statement. I think that many American politologists, let's say free thinkers, accept the fact that American dominance is in decay. They can't control the world to the same extent as they did right after the Second World War for many reasons. Just let me mention just one of them. Right, one of the sources of present crisis is the battle that is going on for energy resources. Back in the 60s, I certainly remember quite well the figure. The seven sisters, seven biggest Western oil companies, owned 85% of all the oil and gas fields and deposits. Today, they own only 15%. The rest has been nationalized by governments that actually realized that energy sources is the blood source of the economy. So at this very moment, probably the linchpin of the American economic dominance of the world, that is the US dollar, is also in the decline. Now, definitely it survives because it weakens the European national currency, that is euro, but definitely the sphere of its influence is shrinking. Once again, if you take the energy markets, many countries are considering or have already started in selling and buying oil and gas using their national currencies. And one of the recent agreements between Saudi Arabia, the number one purveyor of oil, its agreement with China to trade in yuan or renminbi is a single of the things are changing. As for the second part of your statement, that it will be the Chinese century, I would probably challenge this assumption for the reason that what Russia, for instance, is trying to advocate and is trying to show by being engaged in so many diplomatic efforts and putting together alternative associations of states, and that is the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, that is BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, with so many countries actually eager to join it. It actually shows a different path of development of international relations. I believe that the next century will be a multipolar world order. It will be more fair, it will be more just, it will be more balanced, and that means it will be more secure and more sustainable.
Please explain to us, how did America build an empire through exploiting energy resources in Middle East and in the rest of the world?
Well, it has a very strong record, it's a long record of engaging in overseas military operations for the sake of controlling the flow of energy resources. We can start from, I think, 1953 with the coup d'etat that brought down the government of Mossadegh in Iran. We can think about punishing Saddam Hussein for invading Kuwait. I remember seeing a wonderful picture in the Australian newspaper, Sydney Morning Herald, which said that Australians don't want to pay blood for oil. The thing is that, for instance, 10% of all the oil deposits in Kuwait were the property of British Petroleum. So once again, we see that the dominance to a great extent of the United States was based on the ability to have cheap and sustainable flows of oil from the Middle East. The certain very special relationship, for instance, between the United States and Saudi Arabia, for instance, that was at the at the root of the collapse of the Soviet Union, when they actually manipulated the price of oil and forcing it to go down in order to cut the revenues in hard currency for the Soviet Union. It was also one of the operations that changed the global map. So, once again, the United States dollar, for instance, which has been agreed to be the major benchmark for trading in oil, is under attack to some extent. One should also remember the aggression, unprovoked aggression, against Iraq in 2003. I subscribe also to the view of some of my colleagues that one of the main reasons for that was that Saddam Hussein, who used to be one of the fierce pro-American dictators in the world, actually he was fighting a whole war against Iran in the interests of the United States. But what he did, what was wrong, what he actually declared that he is going to trade his oil not for the US dollar, but for euro. And that was the time when Washington actually has decided to take him out of the equation.
The US would not like to see even Europe superseding it. Are you saying that the US believes only in unipolarity?
Well, it's more or less evident, after all. The empire, which is the United States in essence, it doesn't have true allies. It can also only have vassals. Vassals meaning
So Europe is a
dependent.
vassal.
Europe is a vassal, and now it's coming to realize that, because the whole sanction war against Europe, which has backfired and has brought many industries in Europe to the brink of collapse to that extent. This sanction war, in fact, is one of the major tools of leading to the deindustrialization of Europe. And when you know, and what one of the revelations that we actually face today is when you take out what we call the manufacturing sector out of the national economy, everything collapses. Because then you have people that lose their jobs. And once they lose their jobs, they can't pay for all the services. And then the service sector comes down. And as we know, in Europe and the United States, the service sector, the amount of money that is circulating in this sector is included into the GDP, into the gross domestic product. So what we see now probably is the start of the deindustrialization of Europe, which is happening, shall we say, on the insistence of the United States that claims that it is all aimed at punishing Russia for starting what I call the Russian irredenta. That means the reassemble of the Russian lands. So this is a way to punish Europe and to turn it to some way into a dependent, loose union of small, weak nations that will very much depend on, for instance, the industries and even service sector from Europe migrating to the United States, and in this way boosting the American economy. This is what's actually happening now.
Why do you think Europe has been on the side of the US? Why do you think NATO together fought so many wars together? And why do you think Europe would now break away from the US when they also have been beneficiaries of the US foreign policy vis-a-vis energy in Middle East?
I don't think that Europe, at least for now, will break this alliance with the United States. They can't just afford it, because to a great extent it's not only because they are truly dependent on the really still huge internal American market. They sell so many goods and luxury goods, like for instance the luxury German cars there, so they do. And also one of the main reasons I believe that they're so tightly linked to the United States through, I would say, the political and to some extent economic elites. The political elites in Europe, and I'd say that I'm not saying it because I heard of it. It's an acceptable truth for really many intellectuals in Europe that see the quality of the political class and the political elites and the governments that have decayed at this moment. They are very much dependent. And some of them, well, we can subscribe in some instances to the conspiracy theories, and some of them are just agents of influence. What they're actually doing, for instance, in Germany, harms Germany more than anybody else, even harm than Russia. Why are they doing it? It's a very big question mark. And I believe that many people, I would say the thinking strata, will question it. Why this is happening? Why this? One of the Italian ministers, it was happening I think 4 months ago, placed a remark in I think in Facebook. He said, "I believe that the sanctions were aimed at hurting Russia until I drove up to the gas station." So what is happening now is probably the process of first of all, of forceful disintegration of the European Union, breaking up the European Union into small and weak states that will be very much dependent on foreign superpower. To some extent, what we're seeing now probably, which is, I believe, I don't like it in fact. I actually was very much in favor of the European Union becoming, let's say, a formidable union of equal states, of where there is a sense of fairness and the policy of fairness on everything. Well, and it was quite an interesting integrational experience. I was very much in favor of it, despite the fact that it was a Europe of different speeds. That it was a very heterogeneous entity. Despite that, I think it was a very good experience. I watched it closely, and I actually approved of it very much. So I personally don't like Europe coming under the yoke or protectorate, you could call it either way, under the protectorate shield of the United States. Because for many reasons, Russia is both a European and a nation country. But if we take our political class and say, it's mostly European, if you take the cultural aspect. So we have so many, we do understand, or at least we do not misunderstand the Europeans, which is more important. So I really deplore the fact that Europe will further diminish its sovereignty. I believe that this is really an epic fail of the whole project launched by the French when they actually started the process of integration of European countries into the European Union.
Explain to us the energy crisis ever since the Ukraine war started. We know that the energy prices have gone over the roof. We also know that Germany is suffering. There is also the view that overall Europe is going to suffer this winter. What exactly is the situation now, and what do you foresee for the energy sector globally?
Well, to begin with, the main reason for the energy crisis in Europe is a major blunders committed by the European Commission and the European Parliament that approved its laws, which were put in place to regulate the energy markets. The basic idea was behind the third energy package and the energy charter that there must be no long-term agreements, long-term contracts pegged on oil prices. This is something, for instance, that Gazprom stick to all throughout these decades, because for the reason that long-term contracts make it predictable, the production, the supply, and the sales. Moreover, as you know, gas is a very special substance. Once you first build, for instance, you drill a gas field, only after you sell this gas. Because once you actually start the production, you should have a pipeline leading to the end consumers. And building all this gas infrastructure is very costly. You get the investment return it is measured in terms of decades. So the producer should have guarantees that there will be an end user that will buy its gas and be happy. The European Commission decided that this allows, for instance, Gazprom to have unproportional income. But the thing is that we use the so-called Groningen formula. Groningen is one of the major gas fields in Holland, and it was the Dutch actually invented it. The price of gas is pegged on oil. That means neither the producer nor the buyer or the seller of the buyer cannot control it. It is dependent on a third commodity, on a different commodity, on oil, which we believe was quite fair. This model was functional. It's good. But the European Commission decided that if you dismiss the long-term contracts and force the producer to sell its product, in this case it's natural gas, on the stock market, on commodity exchange, on hubs, gas hubs, the price will go down because different buyers will compete for it. It could have worked if there was an abundance of natural gas on the market. And obviously, who are actually the producers who can supply, who can afford, who can guarantee sustainable supply of natural gas? Norway? Definitely. But it's the old gas fields and the debits, so to say, they're declining. 10 years ago, I even heard one of the chief executive officers of Statoil saying that we can maintain the production of natural gas at this level probably for another 10 years. But that's all. The others, it's for instance, the gas and oil fields of the North Sea. They're also well matured. You can't take more out of it. Groningen, for instance, the Dutch government decided to close it down because of the earthquakes that the production has been accompanied with. Libya has been bombed and has been turned into a failure state with no more sustainable supplies. Algeria, they need their gas. They have a certain amount of gas for exports, but now they're using it more for internal needs.
So Libya was bombed precisely for this reason?
It was just one of them. I believe it was just one of them. In order to cut the Libyan gas and oil from Europe, from European consumers. Qatar, as we know, sells the number one seller of LNG, liquefied natural gas. You can sell some of it, but once again, the European Commission, by doing everything in order to lower the prices for gas, they just was sending a certain signal to Qatar. Why would they sell their LNG to Europe while there is a premium market, or I would say premium markets in Asia, like China, South Korea, Japan, India? So, the whole model of trying to sell the natural gas on hubs might have worked if there was abundance of natural gas purveyors, but this is not just the case. And once the sanction war was launched by the European Commission against Gazprom, they actually cut the lifeline for their economy, because once the long-term contracts were suddenly cancelled, so the natural gas was now being sold on gas hubs, exchanged. And who actually rushed in? The speculators. That's the time. That's the golden age for them. They immediately pushed up the price up because they were short of supply, but they were not short of consumers. That will actually happen. That's the major reason for it. The money that is now being accumulated by the sellers and the resellers of Russian gas is very huge. And actually, it all amounts to what? I would say it's just more or less legalized swindlers' operations. But that's the Europeans who are actually selling this gas. They are making money out of it.
So this is quite counterintuitive. We also thought that Russia is making a lot of money because of the rise in prices, energy prices.
Very true, because if for instance Gazprom, on existence of the European Commission, has changed its price formula and has included it not certain amount that has been pegged on oil prices, but also it is linked with prices on gas hubs. So it's much higher. So it's no longer long term, it's one spot, one off sometimes sale to certain consumers. Definitely Gazprom and also the oil purveyors of Russian companies, national oil companies, NOCs, they're also making money out of it.
Where do you foresee this entire situation going? What do you think will happen with Europe not really buying energy from Russia, but India, for example, China, for example, and other Asian countries are buying oil and gas on discounted price from Russia? Where do you think this will go?
Well, the thing is, it all amounts to trust. If there is no trust and confidence in your counterparts, especially if they have actually decided, I mean, well, this time the Europeans have decided to go their own way and to switch their energy needs to the supplier of American shale gas and shale oil. I think Russia will have no other choice but to accelerate what it's being called the pivot to Asia. We have already upped the supplies of oil to China. We have upped and we're planning a major increase of supplies of oil through this called the Power of Siberia 2 pipeline to China. As far as I've heard, India has increased sixfold its purchases of Russian oil, which is going by tankers. So on the whole, once we build our additional infrastructure, which is a very big issue, infrastructure linking the oil and gas fields, which is up north in Russia, linking them to the supply pipelines to China, for instance, then Europe will be a second-rate buyer by definition. Whether there will be a turnaround, whether they will make what Margaret Thatcher never did, a 180% round turn backwards, I don't know. Very much depends on how Europe survives the winter of discontent. And the way when they count the pros and cons, let's say, I would say, for instance, in March, April, and May. So very much will depend how they will react to that, because this is the reality, the harsh reality, and which actually demands, and probably will demand, rethinking, at least, reconsideration of the previous policies. But by that time, according to the signals that which is coming from the Russian government, it is going to build up the energy infrastructure which will be aimed to Asia. And that will mean not only new pipelines, probably, that will mean the construction of oil tankers and probably LNG tankers, which will deliver, once again, to Asia, which is no big secret, and probably will remain the premium market.
Do you think Xi Jinping's Belt and Road Initiative is going to be helpful in this objective?
I think yes, to a great extent still, although with so many, a number of European countries not quite understanding the Chinese mentality, offending personally Xi Jinping and China in general, this is a very short-sighted policy, and China might react to that too. Although the One Belt policy, for instance, one road, one belt policy and project, it's not only linking China to European markets, it's also linking it to Asian markets, and to the Middle East. And it might be actually helpful to quite a number of countries. Well, for instance, it's already being, it could be, there will be interlinkage. For instance, recently, Russia and Iran, the Islamic Republic of Iran, have agreed to accelerate the construction of the so-called North-South corridor, which will mean delivering goods as from St. Petersburg through the system, either through railroads, or it will also link through a system of rivers to the Caspian Sea, crossing the Caspian Sea from north to south, then loading it once again on rail platforms, going to the Persian Gulf or just the Gulf, and then through the Gulf, the goods could be transferred to any part of Asia, to India in particular, and to Southeast Asia, even further.
Now that brings me to the question of war. President Putin has announced partial mobilization of troops, and just before his announcement, we also saw that Russia took a hit in Kharkiv region. What is the situation in Donbass? What is the situation of Russia militarily, with Ukraine claiming that it has launched a massive offensive against Russia?
Well, definitely. One of the reasons that we're using, shall we say, a very limited military contingent, which is a major problem. And it's not being compensated by, let's say, the huge superiority in armaments. For instance, the counteroffensive is being called by the Ukrainian forces, which actually led to for them pushing the Russian forces out of the whole Kharkiv region. One of the reasons why I saw this, because they had an 8-fold superiority in soldiers. Usually,
was this a Russian intelligence failure? Did Russia not anticipate it?
Probably we have anticipated what we didn't have. Probably, well, I'm not a military expert, but probably we didn't have the logistical capacity to provide more human power, so to say, soldiers in the field. Because usually, as for what I read from other military experts, usually during the offensive, you have to have the superiority 3 to 5-fold. This time it was 8-fold. So in some reason we just couldn't hold the positions. So right now, after the partial mobilization, some of the, as I understand, capable, experienced military contingents will be freed to come to the front line. The soldiers that will be mobilized right now will actually be used to control the territories. They won't be sent on the front line. Right now this is being done by military personnel which are more experienced. They are capable, let's say, of actually fighting, let's say, right now. So, but this is a very short process. According to some of the forecasts, the ability to balance the superiority of the Russian-Ukrainian forces, will be achieved only in November or probably in December. So at this very moment, the situation is very tense, and as you know, for instance, the Russian-Ukrainian forces are still shelling not only the military lines of the Russian army, but also, as you know, they're shelling cities, villages, and still killing people. So the situation is very, very tense. So what will it change after there will be the results of the referendums in the 4 regions, which is expected probably by the 29th of September, I don't know. But there is just a feeling it could be.
The US is helping Ukraine openly. Europe is helping Ukraine openly with arms and ammunition, with funds. Mm-hmm. Do you think this is essentially a US-Russia war, given the fact that US is actually out there, NATO is out there without declaring it officially, but they are persistently backing Ukraine in this war?
Well, let's look at the facts. One of these successes of the Russian-Ukrainian army has been achieved due to the American intelligence data gathered through the satellites, American satellites. We have, well, it has been reported, we have intelligence information that American and British mostly, and to some extent French, military commanders are taking actually the decisions in the headquarters, in the military headquarters in Kiev and Lvov. We also know that, for instance, some of the HIMARS operations, HIMARS strikes, are being conducted with the help of American military instructors. There are also information that were American and European mercenaries, and even sometimes who are wearing the NATO uniform, military uniform, who actually took part in the counteroffensive in the Kharkiv region. So if you put together all these facts, also what you have mentioned, that they are being provided funds, they are sending armaments, ammunition, and not only that, all that sort. So it is, I would say, a war between NATO and Russia. It is a war between NATO and Russia, or as we say, a war between Russia and the collective West. So, in this respect, the Russian-Ukrainian army of the Kiev regime is, I would say, similar to those two battalions of gusanos, as they were called by the Cubans. They were sent during the US administration under John Kennedy into the Bay of Pigs. They were mercenaries. The Russian-Ukrainian army is a mercenary army. And that's why NATO commanders who are actually controlling it, they actually don't care how many of them die in the battlefield, which is, I would say, very much deplorable. This is a tragedy for Russia and for the Russian world, because it is the case when Russians are fighting Russians. It is a tragedy.
Thank you for this wonderful conversation.
You're most welcome.